Good evening, and thanks so much, Fred, for arranging all this for me. In my book. I'm very, very honored to be able to come over to the US and talk about my work. It's a dream for a philosopher writing in German to finally be translated into English and to be able to give his works to everybody on the whole world because it's in English. That's truly a liberation experience, and I'm very, very happy that I can share this here with you. And I will try to explain you. You already opened up one question here, which I need to answer. Why does this guy call this an erotic ecology? Or why do I think that matter is not only matter, but it is also desire, and that in this short junction of two words, matter and desire, we can already grasp the focus or the center of this reality. So I'll try to explain this to you. I try to keep it narrative and rather simple. It's not, as it is the attempt to develop a philosophy of our reality, which does not follow the mainstream idea that there is matter and then there is something more human like mind or language or culture, and that there is some difference or some abyss between it, or that it's reducible to one of either side. So I'm trying to do something not entirely new. You can find it in other epochs, and you could also call it genuinely romantic. I try to understand that our bodies, the bodies of other beings, and the body of the whole earth are at the same time as they are an outside, they are an inside, a feeling inside, an interiority, an inwardness, and that the key and the door to that inwardness is through our own feeling and sensing bodies. So you could also say that I try to get over dualism in what I'm doing, and I'll try to show you how I think this can be done. I am a biologist, so this is, in one respect, what I'm trying to do is always try to be in contact with my own feeling of being alive. So that's the instance which is giving permission to what I'm saying or what I'm writing. So if it doesn't really make sense to my feeling as a feeling subject, it can't be a good philosophical or biological idea. But on the other hand, I try to understand our bodies in the light of biology, which doesn't need to be mainstream biology, but still needs to be related to what there is. So it will be a little back and forth between these two perspectives, and I will start to explain to you what I mean by reading some passages from the beginning of my book. I'll go on like this. I will always read a little bit just to get you into the ambience of my writing and of my work. And because what I'm doing here is it's a mixture between narrative and, well, that's the side which I told you, which always needs to be in contact with my own feelings of making sense in an embodied fashion. And then I'm trying to understand that in a more analytical way. And the trying to understand that part will be oral, like what I'm doing right here, and the other part will be some paragraphs from the book. And I also need to tell you that's important, actually. I only understood this later when the book was finished. It's also a memoir of a period in my life I spent in Italy, in the Apennine Mountains of Italy, close to Genoa, close to the Mediterranean, in a tiny village in the mountains, where when you go, you have the feeling that somehow time has doesn't run so fast. So you're somehow removed from that which is important in our lives in more urban settings. And I went there because my son had the crazy idea that he wanted to live in Italy when he was 9 years old. And I was so proud of him because, I'm as a German, let's say, post-romantic, I love Goethe and his Italian journey. And all Germans love Italy because it's a kind of counterbalance to Germanness, and so you all know this. So I was thinking, wow, my son at the age of 9. And then we managed to do this, and I ended up alone with him. So my then wife refused to go with us. So you can see there's another story I don't tell you in the whole experience. And then I understood that my son, he had a cultural idea related to Italy, but it was that if he went to an Italian school, he could look out of the window the whole day because he wouldn't understand a word. So that was his plan. And only the plan didn't work because after 2 months he was already more or less fluent in Italian, and then he needed to work. And but that was this time lasted for 6 months, and it was a very it instructed me in many ways, and it opened my eyes in many ways, and you'll find this in my narrative. So I needed to tell you just to get a little bit an idea of the existential situation of the author and philosopher, and also to pay honor to that part of the earth which supported my thinking and my productivity and my which gifted me with insights and presence. There's a rasping sound in my chimney again, my friend says, in agitation. Oh, I need to say that before I go on. No, that's I need to say that the translator is Rory Bradley. It's not my English, and he did such an amazing job with my German. So I actually prefer the English version now. So you need to know also this. So my friend says in agitation, there's a rasping sound in my chimney. Then she has to laugh at herself. She rocks from one leg to the other. She hasn't changed her clothes. In her house coat, she stands in front of my table outside on the terrace of Walter's bar. Balmy air fills the square in the center of the little Italian town in the mountains above the Riviera. The sun has already disappeared, but like its after image, a silvery light settles between the houses as though the night wants to remain illuminated. Something is clawing and scraping behind the wall again. Could you take another look? She asks. She has to laugh again. Maybe a cat fell in there, I say, motioning to the host that I will pay later. That's something you can do there. I get up and follow my friend down the warm alleyway to her apartment. Arrived in her apartment, I climb onto a wobbly chair. She doesn't have more than 3, all of them somehow defective. When people come over for a meal, they have to gather the sofa cushions around the table. I pull the balled-up towel out of the hole in the wall intended for a stovepipe. Ashes fall, rustling onto the floorboards and table. We have to look at each other and laugh again. I already did this once in the morning, pulled out the towel and stood on a chair on my tiptoes, shining a flashlight into the hole above my head. No luck. This time I feel around with my hand. Again we hear the scratching sound, louder this time, frantic. I reach deeper into the chimney and touch something soft, smooth, something round and moving. I shiver for a moment, then grasp it firmly. As my hand reappears, I see that it is a young swift. Its body radiates warmth. I sense the staccato rhythm of its heartbeat. I walk to the wide open window, open my hand, and the bird vanishes like an arrow into the silvery light of the evening sky. Apparently, he had downflown into the chimney and couldn't get back out. Smiling, we look at one another. We can do nothing else. We have to smile. It is quiet, but then we hear the sound again. More rasping. I fumble about once more, reach deeper still into the cinders. I bring another swift into the light. I release it out the window to freedom, where it arcs along the street between the houses and disappears around a bend. The swifts plunge into the air and are renewed to their element. In that moment they are saved, even if they have already grown too weak to survive. I hear their exultant cries, their drawn-out shrills ringing in the evening, and the same exultation fills us as we cannot help but fall into one another's arms, happy to be saved. In that moment, I understand. The swifts are an element of the air, but they are also an element of happiness. The swifts are the children of the air's love of itself. And for the first time, I suspect that we do not properly understand this love when we limit it to an emotion only felt in moments when, for example, we try to keep a particularly desirable person in our life. On that summer evening, I have the impression that love is nothing more or less than pure aliveness in flesh and blood, with a beating heart and outspread wings. Indeed, that every moment in which we encounter life and its desires with affection, this love unfurls, just as those young birds unfurl their oversized wings into freedom and aliveness. To love, I thought, means to be fully alive. But this has significant consequences. It became clear to me that this would cause us to completely rethink how we understand life and its significance. It would mean that for some time we might have understood very little or have forgotten very much about life and the feelings connected with it. And before I explain a little bit further in more analytical terms, let me just describe another scene in which I encountered the swifts in this village. Actually, I made it a habit to go there after sunset and to be greeted by the swifts which dashed around the buildings. In the evenings, swarms of swifts arc through the air as it becomes transparent. The sky around the castle tower shrills with the birds screeching. Hurtling, outpacing each other in squads that interpenetrate, intermingle, and then disperse again, they chase one another. The birds with their slender wings are a gift to the air. Farther above, at the edge of the sky, more flocks dance. The air has been filled with them as though with snowflakes, with dust, with sparks of sunlight. The swifts inhabit the air as sunlit froth, as though the old castle were a cliff surrounded by the swell and surge of the sea. One animal after another plummets toward the walls and turns away in the last tenth of a second, leaning into the turn like a pilot flying a death-defying acrobatic maneuver. Or rather, the other way round. The pilot flying the maneuver turns like the playful swift. Our gaze moves skyward and does not turn away, seized by the bird's dynamism. Our necks bend to follow their curves, circles, and arcs, our eyes sucked upward into the chasing loop-the-loops and fleeing chicaneries of wind-taut bodies, nothing but wings, curving blades that cut tracks into the fabric of the sky. Speechless and humble, as our limbs tingle with the joy of life, our gaze is an homage. The birds' infectious happiness is their trusts in the air's capacity to carry them, the air's power to be void and thereby to support. So as you maybe could feel a little bit, one of the basic experiences I had a lot, I had nearly every day, which was carrying me, supporting me in these days in the Italian central mountains, was that the outer world, the world of other beings, the world of bodies, and even the world of water and stone and rock and anorganic matter is not only a physical scenery, but it is always an inside. And that our own experience of an inside is related to the experience of this outside world. And that even more, that our experience of being, when I say inside, I mean like being a self, having our experience of subjectivity, of feeling inwardness, all you know what is characterizing your deep experience of being someone or something which makes meaningful experiences and which strives to go on, which is joyful, which can be sad, which suffers pain, which enjoys happiness. And this deep experience of being a center of life is related to the experience of others being those centers. And so it seemed to me that we are part of a meshwork of relationships in which we all need one another to experience these relationships as revealing of inwardness. And that's the basic idea of my book, actually. And that's also why I call it Erotic Ecology, because it's ecology because it is about relationships between living beings, or it's about relationships which create the aliveness of living beings, which are on both ends of these relationships. And it is erotic because this world has a lot to do with the desire to be alive, to feel the power of one's own aliveness and the joy of being oneself in contact with the others. And that was a moment I felt so deeply in this in the tiny birds movement when I liberated them from the window, and I could see this beautiful arc along the street, which then translated in the movement to hug my friend, which was very interesting. So we just needed to do this because this joy somehow materialized in space and englobed us and infected us. So the idea is that we are in a world which creates centers of longing and desire and concern, which need one another to unfold and to grow and to realize this desire and concern. And this is always a material process. And desire embodied as a material process is eros. Eros is desire, yearning to get in touch, to get in contact. And it is this desire translated through sensitive skin, through a surface which is able to caress other, through a surface which only becomes conscious of itself through the encounter with other. So that's the basic fundamental idea. And now you can see that my idea of talking about erotic ecology is not, I'll do it like this. That's the first stage of erotic ecology. I start to undress. It's ambitious in the sense that I basically say that eros is, that oikos is eros. And that's something we have forgotten. But that's something we deeply sense when we humans get into contact with other beings, and we get into contacts with stones and water and the sky and the air. Because we meet with something which is part of ourselves and which we need to be empathetically ourselves, and with which we come into a deep exchange if we are truly allowing ourselves to be alive. I'll explain this more in my next points. And so my basic idea is that eros is an ecological phenomenon. And I would go further, and this will become clear a little bit later. I would enlarge this, and I would even say that love is a practice happening in ecosystems, or love is an ecological practice. And it has to do with relations and with becoming yourself and with bodies. And maybe it is even so that to be truly alive automatically is a practice, it's an erotic practice, or it's a practice of love. And all these ideas could be very helpful in readjusting our role in reality. As you all know, we are going through the 6th extinction of species, so there's a huge problem with aliveness on this planet as it just goes extinct. And you all also know that our human civilization has a huge problem with human aliveness, as there are so many there's so many experience of meaningfulness, and there's so many civilization illnesses, and there are so many psychological suffering and mental illness. So we are going through a crisis, through a kind of planetarian crisis of sense making. And this might have to do with the fact that we understand reality only as a material process, plus the add-on of that strange human consciousness striving for some meaning, which in the end it doesn't get, because this is all projection. So you can see my impulse to put something against this, and for doing this to first follow my own intuition and also my own pleasure, if you like, in being in immense contact with like in this small scene, with many different players, like with the whole town, with the owner of the bar, who there was a relation. I could allow myself just to wave and say, okay, I go and I'll be back, with that friend, with these birds. And these are all relationships of mutuality which create self, and they're all mediated by encounter and touch. So they all have this erotic undertone to them. And as you see, it's not erotic in the sense which we use often, reducing it to sexual consumption. It's something much broader, and it's more used in the sense of the antique Greek goddess, Eros, desiring, as Plato says, desiring to generate in beauty. It has more to do with this. And before I come to the next suggestion of a layer of eros and reality, just to remind you again that my idea is that we understand eros as an ecological phenomenon, and through this we can understand our own fascination by other beings. And that's a deep human phenomenon. And it's not valid for all humans. It's not that all humans love nature or love animals, but many do. And many experience the strange consolation in the presence of other beings. And you can even prove medically that the presence of other beings has a very beneficial health effect. So we know that there is something going on. And we feel that there's something going on. So we go out into nature, we see these swifts taking these beautiful, gracious bends, and we feel, this is beautiful, this has something to do with me. And that's my way to, my proposal to understand our world as the eros of matter as desire, that's my way to validate this personal experience within a system of thought which integrates interiority into the bodies in this world. And to go one step further doing this, I just need to check, because telling stories always leads to consuming time. So I'll jump over something I wanted to do. I'll directly get to a small exercise, to an erotic exercise. Don't be afraid, which shows you the interconnectedness of yourself with the remainder of this reality, and which shows you a good deal of mutuality. And for this exercise, it's enough that you just sit there and breathe. Not in an exaggerated way. It's not an esoteric breathing exercise. It's just watch yourself breathing, because that's something we normally do unconsciously, and only when we run or whatever, we run out of breath and we realize, oh God, I need to breathe, or underwater or something. And what are you doing when you're breathing? So you feel yourself breathing in and breathing out like the ocean waves. The air is flowing into you, like the ocean is running onto the shore and withdrawing to the sea again. And you're taking in air, and you give away air which is slightly different, there's more CO2 in it, there's more carbon in it, there's a part of your body in it. As you all know, you're exhaling CO2 and you're enhancing global warming by this, but only in a slight degree, so no need to have a bad conscience. And the important thing in this is that the CO2 comes from your body. It's yourself which you are giving away into the air. And the flip side to what you're doing when you're breathing, giving away carbon which is part of your body. We're all composed of carbon, as you know, like in carbohydrates or in fat or in proteins. It's all carbon. We are carbon beings, carbon systems. And you exhale, and then this carbon flows out into the atmosphere and into the mouths and lungs of the others who are sitting here, and you give away parts of your body doing this. So you know now that breathing in this room, you're breathing in the others. That's depending on with whom you're sitting. It can be a pleasure or it can be slightly repelling. But there's no way to avoid it. If you want to breathe, you need to share your body with the others in this room. And where does your body come from? It comes from eating. And if you eat something, the same process happens. The carbon in the food, as all other beings are also carbon beings, the carbon in the food becomes your body. So if you had whatever you had before, I was so wise to have some mozzarella and a tomato, so I'm relatively safe knowing that I have become slightly mozzarella and tomato, and I cling to my town I'm talking about. So now you will think of what you have had. This morning I had a donut with lemon cream filling. It's a bit different. So I'm slightly donut also. But the important thing is that the erotic thing about this is that we encounter the world which nourishes us in the way that it transforms itself into our bodies. And it's not the way round, like we all learn in school, that we are machines plowing our way through the world, consuming energy given to us by others, and then giving off our exhaust like motors do. And that's what I want to try to explain you, and to enlarge this into a wider picture of erotic exchange. this is not something, it might sound a little bit esoteric also because I introduced it with that exercise, please breathe. But every biologist or biochemist would agree, because you could just prove it by radio labeling your food, and you could just prove where it goes. And it's a very, very strange thing for our dualist mindset, that our food isn't just fuel going through us, but that our food is us. Or the world, we eat the world and the world becomes us, and then we are dissolving into the world again, and that's breathing. That's actually very interesting, that breathing means a kind of back and forth between ourselves as an identity and ourselves as the world. And so you see, breathing means metabolism, food means metabolism, so that's a very basic function, or a very basic reality of our existence. And this basic reality of our existence can only come about by an intimate physical contact with other, with food. That's not us, that's other. And we need to transform this other into ourselves, to be ourselves. That's totally body, that's totally touch. And you know that food intake, eating, drinking is a very sensual process if we pay attention to it. I mean, we can also use it, we can also do it in a very non-sensual way and just not think about it. And sometimes the food we eat requires us to not think about it. Don't think about it. And I think of the coffee machines I have already encountered in the last 2 days. That's something like, better not think about it. There's caffeine in it, and just drink. And but the important point is that it's two important points. It's that I want to make you see that we cannot avoid to be in an exchange relationship with something which is entirely made from matter, which is totally matter, and which then, by being transformed in ourselves, so by being intimately embraced by ourselves, becomes us, which is still matter, but which is also other than matter, or the other side of matter, namely inwardness, or feeling, or however you would call it, self, or subjectivity, or as I call it, desire, the desire to go on, the desire to remain this center of activity. And this has to do with intimately getting into touch with other and transforming this other, and thereby transforming myself. So this is a very, very basic transformative relationship, and that's the base of all ecosystems. Ecosystems are systems in which, and then you see, when I say this now, you see that it's not only a nice and beautiful message I'm giving here, the world is eros, because ecosystems are systems in which one player eats the other. And I'm talking about food, and we can only thrive on other living things. So the deep eros of ecosystems is about transforming lives into other lives, which is not easy to understand, which is not uncomplicated. So it's not as a position which I want to use to substitute our worldview of there's matter, here are humans, and we humans can use the matter for whatever purpose. I don't have to offer a utopia of only beauty and love and without any complications. But I have a picture of a constant transformation guided by desire, which leads to the experience of feeling and self, and which necessitates a continuous renewal and a continuous change, so continuous birth, which comes through continuous dying. That's one part of the picture, and that's, to my eyes, that's this idea of mutual transformation, which is life-giving, but which on the other hand needs a way of undergoing loss and transformation, is a picture which characterizes any kind of relationship. So that's an ecological model, but to my eyes, it's also a relationship model in the broader sense. Self comes to be through the contact with other, which is mutually transformative and which does not leave both sides as they were. That is my basic idea of a relationship, and I think this is larger than only the organic world. This is a principle which we truly find within the actions of matter. And I'm going to read you a little piece from my book again now, because it was so, my stare there was so saturated with the contact with matter. Fred already quoted my little insight I had about that river, and I exactly know where I stood when I had that little insight. That's also very beautiful. So it filled me with gratitude, because when I stood there, I was thinking, wow, it's cool that it could be like this. So I could you lead to that little brook, actually, and which has these tiny, clear, super clear pools where you could bath when you were not shying away from the chill, even in summer. It's very, very cold water. And so what I tried to explain to you, your relationship to the wider reality through your body and through your yearning for your own personal identity and continuity. And I think that this is something which is already at the level of matter acting on matter. We find this already in the working of atoms, which become molecules. And why not think of let's say I will read something about water. So why not think of the water molecule, H2O, chemically, you all know this, 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen, as the result of a mutual transformation of 3 agents which came into this, and which somehow, when you put them together under certain circumstances, desire to get into intimate contact with one another and to yield something new, which then is water. And if you look at nature from this perspective, it is full of touch, it is full of contact, it is full of connections, and it's even maybe it's even the most basic principle that you put 2 things close to one another and then something will happen. That's something we know this. Something will happen. The world is reactive. The world is not only edible, but it's also reactive. So there is a deep interest in making sense of connections, and this is an interest which we also can feel and we also can see when we walk into this world and when we let ourselves be influenced by the expressiveness of this mutual transformation. And that's actually something I want to share with you and want to read. And during the months in northern Italy, my soul spent its most important moments by the rivers, by little rills that hopped flat-footed over round clods, by cool hollows under the shadow of branches that screened the shimmering midday glare, by the far-reaching combes of wild, broad, turquoise rivers. I'm glad that my son learned the beauty of rivers there. Once in the summer, we stopped behind a ledge that the water curved around. The bygone flood had flung a tree onto its rocky tip. We climbed down over the porous rocks into the riverbed of shiny pebbles. Max, my son, broke a few pieces out of a vein of crystals and began to rinse them in the brook, coloring the shallow waters at the edge with the milky white of the stone. Aimlessly, I sought out the most beautiful pieces, round, light, porous pebbles, flat, smooth pieces with brown grain and thin white lines, upon which I resolved to write, in a playful hand, a letter to my daughter, whom I dearly missed. There were gemstones, precious stones everywhere. One needed only to bend over and pick them up. The world was overflowing with treasure. I quickly gathered far more than I could carry. I would have taken home the entire stone-filled riverbed if I could have. I had enough stones for an entire library of letters to my daughter. Why don't I just set myself up here, I asked myself. Why cram my pockets full of this beauty and nearness? Why not do it the other way round? Come here, stay. We humans are such twisted beings, void of memory. The pebbles in the river, the oldest pieces of the earth's crust, the minerals that make up my insides, their cold, velvety cold touch was tenderer than a kiss. The effects of water bring to mind the conditions of the omnipresent physical eros that generates incalculable new interpretations of existence through processes of transformation and physical penetration. The stony beds of the mountain streams present a reflection of the act of flowing, a commentary on the abstract phenomenon of running water that transforms its litheness and alacrity into the language of rock. Water leaves behind traces on fixed objects that reflect its fluid nature. It provokes a question-answer game of the elements. Water that runs over sand at low tide, for example, carves characteristic branching patterns that fan out across the ground. The traces of water look like water, though they are something different. They are a reflection of water in another medium, and this makes them also into the opposite of water, into something fixed: cliffs, stones, sand. And always again searching the closeness of these physical presences, sitting at the stream which runs more or less through the village I was living in, at the fringe of the village, but you can reach it by a 5-minute foot walk, and you sit at this wild stream. I was thinking that it's such a fascinating effect of this mutual transformation, which works always through touch, that in it, there's always an exchange which makes one partner of this relationship somehow become the other. And this happens even to rock and stone. So imagine a wild stream in the mountains. You can even imagine a Rocky Mountain stream. The Apennine Mountains have some Rocky Mountainous, some Rocky Mountain character about it, which I say without ever having been in the Rocky Mountains. So that's basically my Rocky Mountain ambience feeling comes from northern Italy, but maybe some movie images or some pictures. So these huge boulders and smaller pebbles in these riverbeds, and then water covering them and uncovering them. And where does the rock come from? It's the mountains. It's the mountains which have been crushed by the continuous onslaught of water and by gravity, which makes the water run downward. And this leaves traces which make rock, which is the hardest and most edgy material you can imagine, into something completely smooth and round, into something which is a mirror image of water. The round pebbles you find in a stream, if you touch them with your hand, that's the smoothest thing you can ever imagine. They're smooth like baby skin. And so the hard rock becomes something, becomes a mirror image, or becomes an imagination of the smooth and soft water running over it. And the smooth and soft water running over the hard rock jumps and shatters in waterfalls and becomes edgy like rock. So I was sitting there and was thinking, wow, that's so incredible. These two elements meet, and then they they totally merge, and one becomes the other, and one echoes the other, and one imagines the other, and you can understand one through its opposite. So that's another factor, or that's another image of the eros of meeting in this reality. And in the center of this meeting, there always stands this aspect of imagination. So we understand more about rock if we understand it through the imagination of water, and we understand more of water if we understand it through the imagination of rock, and so forth with so many phenomena. I was also thinking that if we understand physical forces like gravity as desires of mutually transforming one another by being in contact, we can have a totally different experience of being a body in this world. So why not experiencing gravity, which we call gravity, as the desire of the body of the earth to hold us? And you all know when you lie down on a meadow that it's beautiful to be held. And that's my second little exercise. Let's see if we can do a third one. If you just get up right now, everybody who feels like getting up, just get up for a second and feel how it feels. Feel that somebody is trying to hold you and trying to pull you into her arms. That's gravity. Gravity is an attraction which wants to transform you into something which is of the giver, of the one desiring you. And we're in a closed room, so it doesn't really work. But just imagine for a second, these beautiful lights are the starred sky above you. I'm talking so much about imagination, so just some moments of imagination, and then feel how much this huge body of the earth holds you, pulls you to her. And imagine that she holds you above the abyss of the sky, so you don't fall. As you know, in space, there's no up and down. So we're standing on the earth, and we're actually facing down, and this huge body holds you. And by holding you, thank you, if you might sit again. And by holding you, it's not only holding you, so that's an emotional experience, but there's also a transformative experience, because we have so many qualities we only have because we are held by the earth. So we can explain our bodily features only because we know there is gravity. If there wasn't gravity, we would be completely different creatures, like marine plankton, which is not so much dependent on gravity. And you know, marine plankton is made of incredibly bizarre forms and structures, which are just possible because there's no gravity working on them. And so there again is this relationship of mutually imagining and understanding one another and mirroring the influence of the other in my own existence. And for example, imagine that what is the way the earth is imagining the moon? How does the earth imagine the moon? What does the moon do? There's gravity at play. So the moon causes the tides, the ocean tides, as you know. So that's very boring. Okay, what does the moon do? Second grade, it causes the ocean tides. But the ocean tides, when the ocean builds up this wave, which is kind of bending to the moon, so that's already a kind of, there's an embrace into that direction. But the ocean tides generate the whole coastal ecosystems related to tidal seas. So all these worms and all these the algae and the crabs and all the animals and the coastal fringes and all this expressive variety and depth of experience are caused by the moon. So you could say the Earth is imagining the moon in the form of the life blossoming at the tidal fringes. That's another erotical encounter, and so forth. Or you could say and that's something actually my teacher Francisco Varela was fond of saying. You could say the flower is imagining the bee, and the bee dreams the flower. to my eyes, that's a better way of putting that flowers and insects have lived in co-evolution. You could say that, that's the way we say it, and that's correct, but you could also say that co-evolution is a mutual deep history of imagining one another. And if you put it this way, you always have the aspect of meaning coming from the encounter of two or of several bodies which undergo a mutual transformation. So we can enclose the aspect of meaning into our worldview, which otherwise, if we would just put it as a mechanistic and functional, well, let's say not even relationship, structure, we lose this. And with losing the aspect of meaning, we lose the whole dimension of our own experience, and we lose the connection to the remainder of the world, which we know intuitively, belly-wise, is connected to us. So I think there's much speaking in favor of trying an erotic ecological worldview. It's a way of unifying things which have fallen apart all the time. And let me check my watch. I read you one more scene, a very communal, a scene of communion. But maybe I need to tell you one more thing. Yes, I need to tell you one more thing. This has been a very physical lecture, actually. There were many rocks and stars in the game, and water, and not so many living beings. And but right at the beginning, I said that I would say that we should speak of eros as an ecological factor, or of ecos as eros. But on the level of our experience, we could also say that being part of an ecosystem means to be being part or be exercising a practice of loving. So let me just try to explain to you why I think we could even enlarge the notion of eros as an ecological reality to the idea that we can understand ecosystems as love processes. So what is love then? What is love in my eyes? If you take this basic core principle, this basic core idea, I have tried to explain to you that a meaningful self comes to be only through an exchange with other, which we find on the level of gravity, which we find on the level of our own metabolism, and which we find, for instance, on the level of psychological development, when a kid always needs the presence of a caregiver to show that he or she is wanted to be, or is welcomed into being. So we find this on so many levels, that a healthy self is only possible through the presence of other, which then always leads to a mutual transformation. And I think this principle, which is on the one hand seen from this physical perspective, it's the core erotic principle. It's exchange through body, but on the other hand, it's also the core principle of making self possible through other. And this, to my eyes, is the one-on-one of relationship. It's being myself through realizing other. That's the great challenge, and that's the great mystery of relationships, and even of human relationships, is try to be yourself by granting the other space, and thereby being transformed by this other who wants to be herself or himself and needs the space. And I think this is it might be a little abstract view of a human relationship, but I think it boils down to this. And if you try to follow this general idea, okay, let me try to be myself by giving you the space to be yourself, then you would arrive at a very mature way of leading a relationship. And at the same time, that's an ecological principle. And that's what makes me say that ecosystems are way of loving relationships, or ways of loving. I don't mean it in a cheesy way, like nature is always beauty and love, and just look at the flowers and so on. I mean it in the way that is actually making our idea of love more complicated, but also more instructive, because we can see how exchange relationships in reality do work. And then we can orient our own meaningful exchange relationships with other beings and other human beings. We can orient them according to how these mutual transformations in the world work. And well, to my eyes, it's very interesting. And to me, as a romantically inspired philosopher, it's absolutely satisfying that I see the same principles at work in the most basic levels of matter and in the most lofty workings of the human soul. That's something, it might repel others, like, oh God, no, that's just what I don't want to. But to me, it's crazy. To me, it's really something really beneficial, because then I can explain my love for the rocks. I don't need to go on asking, why do I love this beautiful, smooth stone? Why is the floor of my apartment covered with piles of rocks? Now I know. Or why do we so much enjoy to bath in the water of a small lake in summer? Why is this so magic? Why is it? I mean, it's not projection. Some schools of psychology would say, okay, it's just so magic because you project your desires onto the outward world, and then you have read too many romantics, and you did too much German philosophy, and you know where that leads to, and just stop it and think about the frequency of the genes you transmit into the next generation, and so on. But we all know that our skin knows, and we all know that by getting into physical contact with otherness, we experience something deeply about the world. And we all, maybe not we all, but many have had these hierophanic or mystical experiences with otherness. So we know there is something going on. And I think it's instructive, and we should take this more seriously. And now I'm just reading you the last paragraphs of my attempt to take this more seriously, which was also a little bit hedonistic. And I think taking things seriously should always be a little bit hedonistic. That would help. And this is about. It's about water again, and it's about a tiny lake in Berlin, in the Berlin city forest, which is close to the place where I live. So I'm very lucky. You can see that there's this lake, which is crowded in the daytime, but in the evening it's rather, you find not so many human beings there. The lake was completely filled with itself, and on its surface the lilies drifted just like me. The lake touched me with its cool, tender skin, whose taut surface hesitantly shivered as I moved through it, swimming. The lake let me truly feel my own skin with its gentle pressure, its cool, then warm enveloping of me. It was full of a you that embraced, bathed, and touched, and this touch made me into myself, allowed me to feel every square inch of my body's surface, and I had to laugh again, laugh with happiness in the middle of the lake, alone and carried, and I turned onto my back and gazed into the heavens held by a smooth, slightly swaying mirror. That was the high point of summer. I remember that once, as I was swimming back near to the shore, in a spot where I could stand again, I encountered another swimmer, a kind-looking Japanese woman who was wearing an oversized pair of goggles for some reason. She was standing in the water with her squarish, overlarge mask and staring agog at 4 young ducks paddling toward her from a carpet of water lilies. And then her whole face broke out in laughter. She stood there alone and could not stop laughing. And with my wet skin and limbs surrounded by cool water, I understood that laughter is an organ of happiness, not of humor. With our laughter, we greet happiness, just as this Japanese woman greeted the ducks and the you in their black button eyes, just as I greeted the water and the you in this water. All that mattered was laughter, was laughing, and happiness. And I also understood that love is an act of truly encountering another, of a willing engagement of the self, whose first action is to risk its own skin. Diving into the lake between wild mint and sorrel and feeling the water, taking the lake gently in your hands and letting it run between your fingers. And this practice of love means always accepting and even desiring what is, means being healed by being accepted. And this acceptance is, of course, also painful, and yet this pain is so minor when compared with the birth that accompanies it. Or rather, the pain is perhaps immense and unending, but it is offset by the fact that its other is birth, birth that comes from being desired, and it is good, even if it is only the tiniest imaginable birth to balance out all of the world's pain, because that which is born is desired and wished for and loved by eyes that say, be. Yet, yes, this feels right, coherent in thought, in the throat, in the stomach, in the pores of the skin. It feels right now and for always, and it is good this way, even if it hurts, even when the doors open, close, irreversible. After that, the unknown, death, the eternal beginning, the always and never, a summer evening, a spark of the endless summer, of the world's summer essence that is always there in your gaze, in my love. It is no different, never more planned, more protected, more professional, more hardened, never less happy. It is just a step, a pause, a turn. There it is within me, the happiness that does not belong to me alone, but to the world. I was born with it. I recognize it again. It was there at the beginning, the cell's feeling of amazement that they should possess so much beauty that they would multiply and combine into something ever greater. The newest amazement at the world's oldest matter of course, to be able to become greater and more beautiful and to feel the desire to share greatness and beauty with open hands, to be present to the invisible spark that is the center and the whole, to be the spark itself. I was born with this, you too, all of us. It is in fact the energy with which every birth is conceived. It is the thing that pushes us into life, the deep insight that has no form and no name, and that yearns and also confidently knows that this yearning is insatiable and will therefore always be revived anew, no matter how devastating death and breakdown was and is and will be. This is the moment that floods our skin when it sinks into the pillowy green weight of the Teufelsee, the lake, the moment in which the pointed ovals of the water lily's petals emerge in the soft perceptions of our body, their whiteness so unblemished by the void, the yellow in its inmost nourishing to our perceptions like a warm egg yolk. This is the reason the woman with the big goggles laughs while the young ducks paddle around her, curious, amazed, bathed in trust. All of this is the encounter with the living other that offers life, with a you that makes us into ourselves, into something that is, in turn, a you for the other, a feeling countenance that gives trust. We ourselves are this living guarantee there in our inmost core, which is completely empty, and then fully of the next moment, always and even so, always a yes, a bidding, come, a thank you. Voila, in our inmost core, there it is. As Marshall Rosenberg, the psychologist, once described it, it is the way children feel when they feed a hungry duck, a game that makes both parties happy because it consists of nothing other than the exchange of gifts. Naked, unarmored, curious, courageous. Now. Thank you.